Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Creative Christian Podcast. I know it's been a while. It's been a long time since I had any sort of update on the show. Last year was crazy, and I'm actually going to get a little bit into what's been going on in my life a little bit later in the episode. But long story short, the longer my unintentional hiatus from this podcast went, the more I felt like it would be a disservice to my audience if I came back without really knowing the direction that I wanted to take this podcast in the couple months moving forward. And my goal has always been to provide a window into the insights of Christians that are in the creative space. And to do that, to equip my audience to pursue the gift of creativity that God's placed in all of us. And moving forward, that's still going to happen. But one thing I've realized is that when I started this podcast, it kind of had yet to be built. I was quite literally the opposite of a hostess with the mostest. I was inviting people into what I would say is an unfinished home and handing them a hammer and asking them to build alongside me. And to the guests who actually said yes to that, I owe an immense amount of thanks for joining me in building this house. What was once just an idea turned into a foundation, and it's now been fleshed out with walls and structure. And maybe I'm taking this house analogy a little farther than I intended, but I will say this. My hope is to invite guests onto this show to inspire and encourage you, the listeners, while also providing a hospitable environment that serves and encourages the guests just as much. And to do that, I, as the hostess, have a role to finish building the house, even when the guests joining are happy enough to pick up a hammer and work alongside me. And this podcast isn't where we started it. It's grown a ton, but it's got a lot more building to go. So I just want to ask you guys to bear with me over the next few months, because my goal is to continue bringing content your way between the awesome inclusions of guests who so graciously come on board to share their wisdom. So in addition to guest interviews, I hope to bring you guys content that will provide both encouragement and information on both the spiritual and the practical side. That means practical breakdowns on pop culture, church culture, and hustle culture. So in 2025, let's keep trying to break away from that last one. And it'll also mean more exploratory content such as equipment reviews and creative space setup ideas, which are two things that I've become really passionate about recently. So expect some content based on that. It'll also mean some more solo content drawing on my experiences in both the freelance and corporate world, but even more excitingly, current experience in vocational creative arts ministry. And that's where we segue into what's new in my life and what God's been up to in this long hiatus here on the podcast, because yes, that means I'm back in the church world on staff with a local church's creative team. And the story is a pretty crazy testimony of just how cool and intentional our God is. So I'm excited to share that with you guys, but let's start by rolling it way back to around the time when the Creative Christian Podcast really started to take off. I had been dreaming of starting the podcast for years at this point, but had also stepped down from a role at the creative staff at my church that I was going to at the time, just a few months prior. And that was one of the more difficult decisions I'd had to make at that point in my life, but one that the Lord was undoubtedly guiding me towards. And so when I made that decision, I had truly thought my time working in ministry was done. Not that I'd never do ministry per se again, because in Matthew 28, we're all charged with making disciples by Jesus himself. But as far as calling ministry my full-time job, yeah, I thought that was never going to happen again. And I remember telling God, as I processed that decision, something along the lines of, well, we had a good run. And for some reason, my heart was continually drawn to the creative needs of the church at large, even after that. And as I adjusted to life as a layperson and slowly began to release what I felt was a need to be involved in all things creative at my church to the Lord, I honestly began a 2-year journey towards recentering my identity in who God made me to be and not just what he made me to do. And eventually he drew me from one church community to another, and that community was large enough that I was forced to take a complete break in creatively serving the church, simply because there was no need for volunteers in their fully staffed creative department. I hated that, but it turned out to be a blessing. The forced break was exactly what my heart needed to both heal and seal what the Lord was speaking to me about the crossroads between my identity and my creative giftings. And in the meantime, I have this podcast as an outlet. Connecting with some incredibly talented people far wiser than me led to sinking deep truths into my heart about God's desires, not only for creativity, but for the people that he made to be creative as well. And this kind of all led to this crux moment for me where essentially my church at the time was just happening to do a call to ministry Instagram live. And I was like, I'll check it out. I'll watch it just to kind of see behind the curtains. How are they managing ministry? Why do they do it? In the sense of, man, I really wanted to understand and see, for my friends that were on staff at our church, or, just how it contrasted with my own experience working on our church staff, that type of stuff. Purely academic standpoint. Did not watch that thinking, yeah, maybe that could be me someday. So I watch Instagram live, and I'm not really asking questions in the chat, and just kind of like a silent observer, like the creeper fly on the wall person. And towards the end, one of the pastors that was on the chat, our student's pastor, basically said, hey, if you guys are interested in just connecting with somebody and talking about any questions that you might have, just shoot this number a text, and we'll send you a form and you can get connected. And so, and one of the key things he said too was basically, hey, if you send this text, you're not like signing up for anything. You're not committing to go into ministry. It's not like an intro to an interview. Like, this is just to serve you. And so I was like, man, I think there definitely are some questions and some thoughts that I have, and maybe some things that I just need to continue to process from my time working at a church, now being at a new church. And so I sent that form in, and I didn't really think anything of it. I was like, okay, whatever. I asked a question in the form and got sent off into the internet. And I was like, I don't know who's going to read this, but I felt like I needed to send something, and there you go. So fast forward to a couple weeks later, turns out that we're a multi-campus church, right? So it doesn't turn out that way. I knew that it was a multi-campus church, but as it turns out, all of the responses that were received to that form were sent out to the staff at the different campuses based on who sent it, right? So I said, hey, I attend X campus. And then all of the staff at X campus got everybody that said my campus's name in the dropdown. And basically we're like, okay, let's divvy it up. Let's see, who wants to talk to who. And one of my dear friends on staff was like, hey, like, I know Bailee, I'll talk to her. So we made plans to grab coffee and just talk through whatever was on my little heart to talk about. And this is where it gets a little crazy, because it actually took us a really long time to set stuff up. So this wasn't like, oh, I like sent this text in on this call to ministry thing, and a couple weeks later, here we are. It was like, I sent the text or sent the form, received the form. We planned to try and meet up, and we couldn't get something figured out until like almost like a month and a half later. And so, and I know that doesn't sound super crazy, but the timing of what happens next makes this super crazy. So we meet up, and, I'm just walking through a lot of stuff that honestly she already knows, because we've talked a lot, but, fears that I had from my previous experience in ministry, and why I think maybe God could call me back into ministry, but like definitely not now, right? And, all those types of things that come up in conversations like that. And we're talking, and then in the middle of us sitting down for coffee, I get this text from a guy that I went to high school with. It was a media productions with in high school, but honestly haven't really seen since. We'd like seen each other. We followed each other on social media, but like we're not homies, we're not besties. And so I get that text, and it goes something along the lines of like, hey, Bailee, not really sure what you're up to work-wise, but I'm on the video team here at our church, and same church, but the church is large enough that we hadn't really crossed paths and all that kind of stuff. But he's like, hey, we're looking to hire somebody in our social media department. Wanted to pass on this role to you just to see if it was something you'd be interested in. Check it out. If not, no worries, but really felt led to send it to you. And I like stopped my friend mid-conversation. I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but like, please look at this text I just got. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. And I was like, do you know him? And she's like, no, I didn't even know. Like, it was really crazy. So I respond to him. Well, my first thought is I should just pretend I never saw the text and ignore it. And right after that thought, I had another thought of that probably isn't from the Lord. So maybe I should give this more thought. And so I text him back and I'm like, hey, this is really crazy. Here's some details about the conversation that I'm literally having right now. So I think it'd probably be pretty crazy for me to not at least check this out. So send my number to anyone you need and we'll move on from there. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. You know, all the stuff, right? It's like, oh, God doing crazy things and blah, 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 you know, we Christians see God working out some crazy quote unquote coincidences. We tend to get fired up. So that happened. And so that kind of led to multiple conversations about me potentially taking on this role. And a lot of the conversations kind of ended with, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. Definitely seems like God is saying something to you. We encourage you to apply. And I was like, cool, I'll think about it. And then I'd have a conversation with somebody else and it was, you know, that's so crazy. Definitely seems like God is saying something. We encourage you to, at the very least, apply. And I was like, I'll keep thinking about it. So I keep stringing them along for probably about a week and a half or so. And they end up, you know, obviously posting the job online because they can't just like wait when there's a position that needs to be filled for some girl to wake up and maybe decide to pursue the job. They have to actually fill the position. So they post the position online, and what's really crazy is my former supervisor at my previous church job, who now attends my current church, but at a completely different campus, sends me the job posting and goes, "You gonna apply?" And I was like, what would you say if I told you that I'm already in conversations with some people about applying? And I will never forget this. She literally just responds like super matter of fact, just, I would say, what's holding you back? And I think that was the moment where I was like, that's a great point. What is holding me back? And it was fear. It really was. It was fear of getting disappointed or getting let down. And honestly, I didn't know if I was cut out for church work again. And I think what really softened my heart to applying was, man, maybe there's something that God even just wants to do in the application process for me to really help take me to the next step of whatever he's got in this journey for me. But also at the same time, like, I'm never going to know unless I just give it a shot. And so it was just a matter of, hey, I don't know what the rest of the road looks like, but I know the next step that God's calling me to take, and I can obey that. And right now I'm choosing to just kind of hold out and see what's coming up. And so, so I mean, I think God really used that moment to convict me. And I applied and I went through a massive interview process. And in that was a lot of highs and lows, ups and downs of, hey, I'm at a job where I feel really comfortable. And in my mind, nothing would happen if I just passed on this opportunity that the Lord was putting in front of me and I just stuck with what's coming. And on the other side was, man, I really can tell that God is calling me to do something. There's a next step that he's asking me to take. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know that typically saying no to God does not turn out very well. So those were the thoughts kind of wrestling in my head. And it was crazy because as I continued to just kind of take the next step and take the next step and take the next step, God really provided answers to a lot of my fears. I'll give you one example. So one thing that I was kind of struggling with was, hey, there's going to be a big change in finances if I were to take on a job that isn't in the corporate world, right? Corporate world is just, it tends to be pretty lucrative. And, not that I'm like living super large, but I'm living comfortably, And so I was like, man, like there might be a chance that it's harder to pay rent or it's harder to make up groceries or pay bills on time and that type of stuff, just different fears. Or, hey, I want to be saving up for a house, and that probably is not going to be as much money going into savings as I thought it was, just different fears like that. And it was crazy because in that moment, there was a fear around saying yes to that. But again, just a pull of, hey, Bailee, you've got a step right in front of you. I just need you to take that. I can't show you what's next until you take that step. And so, I continue to take a step forward, move on in the interview process. And God provided a really crazy way for my roommate and I to basically get involved with the ministry, move to a different apartment, potentially a larger apartment, and pay significantly less in rent. And the timing of that would be within a few months after starting at my new position. And so, just crazy things like that, where it's like, hey, as I continue to take next steps, God continued to provide. As I continue to take next steps, God continued to really blow me away with, hey, this is what I can do when you actually trust me. And so that all led to really sitting down with leadership at that church, walking through my history and my past with working for a church previously and what I learned there and what I've learned in my time since. And really knowing that as much as I was praying and pursuing the Lord and making sure that this is a good fit for me and what he wanted me to do, that they were also praying and pursuing the Lord. And, hey, is this what's best, not only for our church, but what's best for Bailee? And I was blown away by how humble and before the Lord everybody was in this process. It was incredible. And just really felt super secure that not only that they had my back, but that God really had my back through them. And so I think that was just, it was something that really ministered to me. It really it lifted a weight off my shoulders. It put a comfort over my heart, and I ended up accepting a position with them. And I'm really excited. I haven't really jumped too much into the work yet. And I am excited to continue, like I said, bringing a perspective, not only from this new job that I'm going to be working, but also from my work in the freelance world and my work in the corporate world. And I think that I'm just really excited to be able to have some multiple perspectives to bring to the table to really serve this audience, and to be given the opportunity to really serve my church community in a way that is kind of brand new to me, in a way. And so that's what God's been up to in my life. And so here I am, I'm back in ministry. And while God's taught me a lot through the process, I think one of the biggest takeaways I've received is just how gracious God is when we obey the step that's right in front of us. And sure, God's got good plans for every single one of us, but we're not taking those steps, then we're not seeing what's ahead on the path. And when we do obey, we do get to experience what Paul talks about in Philippians 1:6, where he says, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So I'm super excited for what's ahead, both personally and on this podcast. And if you made it this far, thank you for letting me share my story with you. And what God has done in this season of my life has encouraged me so much in my faith. And so I hope it brings a similar encouragement to you, no matter where he has you at in this season. We've got some awesome stuff ahead here on the Creative Christian Podcast. So if you haven't subscribed on your podcast network of choice, please be sure to do so. And if you like this episode, please consider rating and reviewing the show. It is the #1 way to get our encouragement out in front of other creatives just like you. Happy New Year, y'all. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. And until then, keep creating.